The problem with building a private paradise, Alistair Sterling had discovered, was that paradise had a way of attracting people you were trying to escape. He'd purchased the island resort 3 years ago, not for profit, but for silence. For the kind of quiet that let a man hear his own thoughts again after a decade of everyone wanting a piece of him. Tonight, however, that silence was shattered. The resort was hosting a celebrity wedding, and even from his private beach, he could feel the distant thrum of expensive chaos. He'd retreated here with his sketchbook, as he always did when the world pressed too close, hoping the sunset would wash away the noise. And then she appeared. Not in the way people usually appeared in his life, with agendas and pitchforks and handshakes that lingered too long. No, she stumbled out of the foliage like a startled bird, a camera bag slung across her shoulder and a look of pure, unguarded panic on her face. Her name was Clara, though he didn't know that yet. He only knew that when she turned toward him, the fading sun caught the edges of her hair, and he felt something inside him shift. It was absurd. It was instantaneous. It was the most real thing he'd felt in years. He had always believed in control. In strategy. In the careful architecture of a life built on decisions, not whims. But watching Clara apologize profusely for trespassing on his private beach, watching her explain with breathless sincerity that she was just a photographer looking for the perfect light, he understood something profound. Love at first sight wasn't a myth invented by poets to sell books. It was the terrifying moment when your carefully constructed walls crumbled because one stranger looked at you as if you were the most interesting person in the world. She didn't know he was a billionaire. She didn't know he owned the resort, the island, the very sand beneath their feet. She just saw a man with a sketchbook, and that was enough. He offered to walk her back, knowing full well he was buying time. Every step through the winding garden paths felt significant. She talked about her work, about the way a photograph could freeze a moment so perfectly that the emotion in it became eternal. He listened, truly listened, in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. When she asked what he did, he simply said he was a guest, a man who liked to draw. It wasn't a lie. It was the truest thing about him. When he finally watched her disappear into the main building, her figure growing smaller until she was just another guest, he stood there for a long moment, heart racing. That night, he instructed his assistant to find out everything about the wedding photographer. He told himself it was professional curiosity. He told himself he just wanted to ensure her stay was comfortable. But deep down, buried beneath the layers of a man who had built an empire from nothing, Alistair Sterling knew the truth. He had been waiting for a feeling like this his entire life, and he was not about to let it walk away. The wedding day arrived with a sky so blue it looked painted, and Alistair spent the morning doing something he'd never done before. He watched. From the terrace of his private suite, he observed Clara as she moved through the resort with a quiet grace that seemed entirely out of place amidst the frantic energy of the event. While others rushed and shouted and stressed over floral arrangements and seating charts, Clara was a calm center, her camera an extension of her soul rather than just a tool. She captured laughter, tears, the nervous fidgeting of the groom, the proud smile of the bride's grandmother. She saw people, not just subjects. And Alistair realized he was jealous of every single moment she captured. The crisis came during the golden hour. The bride, already anxious about the demanding schedule, became distraught when the designated photography spot was overrun with guests. Clara, however, remained unflappable. She gently reassured the bride, her voice warm and steady. Alistair watched from the shadows and made a decision. He approached quietly and offered his private terrace, a secluded space with a panoramic view of the ocean. He didn't introduce himself as the owner. He simply said he was a guest who rarely used it, and it would be his pleasure. Clara's grateful smile, directed at him, was worth more than any business deal he'd ever closed. After the chaos subsided, she found him on a quiet bench overlooking the garden. She thanked him properly, and for the first time, their conversation moved beyond pleasantries. She confessed that she often felt like an outsider in these worlds of wealth and spectacle, that her passion was for genuine human connection, not the trappings of luxury. He admitted that he understood loneliness better than most, that he had spent years surrounded by people who wanted his money and not a single one who wanted just him. When she asked why he was always alone, he shared a truth he rarely spoke aloud. He had lost someone important to him years ago, and since then, he'd built walls so high that even he couldn't see over them anymore. Her eyes softened, and in that moment, something shifted between them. A light rain began to fall, and they stepped under the shelter of a nearby pergola. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and flowers. She shivered slightly, and without thinking, he reached out to brush a stray petal from her hair. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and the world seemed to stop. It was just a touch. A simple, gentle gesture. But it carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. She didn't pull away. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then reality intruded in the form of her phone buzzing. She had a flight to catch. Before she left, she promised to send him a copy of her favorite photograph from the day. She didn't know his real name. He was just the kind stranger on the beach. Later, while waiting at the airport, Clara checked her phone and saw a news article her friend had sent. There, on the screen, was a photo of the resort owner. It was Alistair. The man she had been falling for, who had shared his fears and dreams with her, was a billionaire. He owned everything. A wave of confusion and hurt washed over her. He hadn't lied, but he had hidden the most important part of himself. As her flight was called, she boarded with a heavy heart, unsure if the man she'd met was real or just another illusion in a world built on them. 3 weeks passed, and Clara tried to forget him. She threw herself into her work, editing the wedding photos, taking on new clients. But every sunset reminded her of his voice, every gentle breeze of his touch. She told herself it was foolish. He was a billionaire, a man from a world she would never belong to. Men like him didn't fall for wedding photographers who got lost in their own gardens. Men like him collected people like souvenirs. But no matter how many rational arguments she made, her heart refused to listen. She ached for him. She missed the way he listened, the way he saw her. She missed feeling seen. Then the doorbell rang. It was a gray afternoon, rain streaking the windows of her tiny apartment. She opened the door and there he stood, dressed simply in jeans and a worn jacket. No chauffeur, no assistant, no entourage. Just Alistair, holding a single sketchbook. He looked different without the resort's quiet elegance. He looked real. He looked like a man who had traveled hundreds of miles with nothing but hope and a confession. He didn't wait for her to speak. He told her he was sorry. Not for who he was, but for not trusting her enough to share it sooner. He explained that for years, his wealth had been a shield and a curse, attracting people who saw dollar signs and not a soul. But with her, he wanted something different. He wanted to be seen, not as the billionaire, but as the man who sat on the beach drawing sunsets. He told her he'd sold the resort, that he was starting a foundation to support young artists, that he was trying to build a life of meaning instead of money. And then he said the words she'd been terrified to hope for. He told her he was in love with her. Not the idea of her, not the photograph of her, but her. Her kindness, her passion, her stubborn refusal to be impressed by his fortune. He loved the woman who got lost in the garden and found a way into his heart. Clara felt tears streaming down her cheeks. She asked him if he was sure. If he was ready for a life that didn't involve private jets and 5-star hotels. He laughed then, a real, unguarded laugh, and said he had never been more certain of anything. He didn't want her for her photography or her charm. He wanted her for her soul, her honesty, the way she made him feel human again. She stepped into his arms, and he wrapped himself around her like she was the most precious thing in the world. It wasn't a passionate embrace. It was a hug of profound relief, of two people finally finding each other after years of wandering. Her head rested against his chest, and she felt his heartbeat, steady and real. She belonged there. She belonged with him. A year later, Clara stood in a sunlit gallery, surrounded by her work. The exhibition featured photographs from their travels together, markets in Marrakesh, temples in Kyoto, children laughing in small villages. Her work had never been more alive, more authentic. And beside her, holding her hand, stood Alistair. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He was just a man, her man, who had traded an empire for a life rich with love. They had found their forever, not in a grand gesture, but in small, honest moments. In morning coffee and whispered secrets. In the way his eyes still lit up when she walked into a room. In the promise of a future built not on wealth, but on something far more valuable. A love that had started with a single glance and would last a lifetime.